how do we need to respond collectively as a community of Black people, of allies, of people who aspire for a fair and just world? How should we show up in this moment?
Looking for the ultimate conversation on Black innovation and wealth creation?
Look no further. From Chains to Links brings together some of the top Black entrepreneurs, academics, creatives, and futurists
To discuss how we reimagine Black community.
and build a collective vision for true Black prosperity.
So get ready. We're about to go there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special episode of From Chains to Links. I am your co-host, Kelly Burton, and I am here with the indomitable Ifeoma Ike. And we are going to talk about her brand new bestseller, The Equity Mindset. Welcome, Ify.
Oh, hey, Kelly.
So, you know, our team and your village are so doggone excited
Y'all are the greatest.
about this phenomenal book. And if you haven't already gotten a book, you need to not only get one, but get several, because other people in your life need this book. And giving is, what is that saying? Sharing is caring?
Sharing is caring.
Yes, but buying a book and giving it away has...
Gifting is also
Gifting
caring.
is also, that's right. It drives up the sales so we can continue to hit all of the top bestsellers list. So, first of all, congratulations, my
Thank
friend.
you.
This is a phenomenal milestone and accomplishment. And it's been just a beauty. It's just been a gift kind of watching it come to life. So I want you to talk a little bit about the impetus for this book. What made you decide to sit down? Because writing a book is no small task.
Right.
So what caused you to say, you know what, this is meaningful enough to take significant time from my life in order to put pen to paper?
Oof. Again, thanks to you, Kelly, the Black Innovation Alliance team, for just a beautiful runway to the launch of this book. There are like several different reasons why I felt like putting this in a book. As you know, I've talked a little bit about like there are some journeys that come to mind around how frequently my default to problem solving really is built on like what I call an equity mindset. Mm-hmm. Like I am almost always looking for fixes that can be measured, fixes that reduce harm, fixes that improve people's lives. I think we largely call that social impact now, but there was a time where there wasn't even a term for that. And I think we can even critique a little bit as to whether the umbrella of social impact is focused on those disparity reductions. But I was always very intimately connected to certain theories that were about human beings not having certain things. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one that I raise frequently because I really don't know if as society we've really prioritized like, wait, what does it mean when community members, for those that don't know the theory, Maslow's theory, it's not a strict theory, but it does really talk about the conditions that are needed for people to survive. Yeah. And what is important about that is his theory is that all of the parts of that pyramid, often, you know, segmented in colors, that all of them are important for us to survive, the top being self-determination.
Yes.
But the bottom layer, which is like, you know, physiological needs, and to an extent even psychological needs, I find that when I look through that list, housing, rest, food, healthy sexual relationships, intimacy, what have you, all of those have really stark, you know, statistics as it relates to us as a people. And that then makes me wonder, like, well, then how are people are existing, but are they actually living, right? And so a lot of my work, whether it was working on the Hill, whether it was Innocence Project, whether it was being on the ground in Haiti, being on the ground in Ferguson, whether it's designing strategies with Black Innovation Alliance, all of them come from this space of how can we actually get the basic foundation so that we can begin to experience humanity in ways that other communities, and unfortunately often that baseline is whiteness, but in the ways that whiteness gets to experience it. And I just find that to be the urgent human rights, mission that regardless of what industry you're in with my consultancy, it's like, how do I get more people to adopt an equity mindset as a problem solving tool? So for a while, it picked up during COVID, I was teaching a curriculum, or a lot of what my team was being brought in to help companies with was to like, what is this equity mindset thing? And we would just kind of like talk through it. And a lot of it was just like conversations. So fast forward, our team is pink cornrows. Like there are a lot of other facets that we're trying to go into. And so for me, it's like, how can I free up my time a little bit so that we can get a little bit deeper into how do we create more rest for working class women? How do we create more nuance in the conversations around innovations ignored by Black and brown people? How do we create more visibility for disability spaces for those that have intersectional lives and lives that are often ignored? And I was like, well, what can I do to start the conversation in spaces that I'm not physically able to be in? So the book is really an attempt to get people to fracture a little bit their understanding around equity. It's not a diss towards D&I, I think, but I do think when people hear equity, they automatically think D&I. And I think for me, it's like equity is the larger umbrella, which D&I fits under, right? We should use whatever tools we need to use to achieve equity, but equity is the goal. So yeah.
Now, I find that there's a lot of confusion with even the concept of equity and what it means. A lot of people use equity and equality interchangeably. Right. So how do you define equity in the book?
Very simply, I would say that you can't achieve equality until you achieve equity. It's just equity is like the stop before equality. And in some ways, and in a lot of ways, people say equality to avoid talking about equity, right? There's this sameness thing that happens when we talk about women's rights. And I'm always like, well, then which women, right? That is an equity question. When we talk about disabilities, are we talking about visible or hidden disabilities? Like which disability? That's an equity question. So it's not that equality is not a righteous goal, but it does mean that equity then is part of the strategy to get there. So in the book, and then separately, equity has also been used quite a lot in the concept of like fairness. Like how do we ensure that people are experiencing fair lives? How do we ensure some of that are a little bit more amplified, talk about fairness and justice. What I feel like is missing, and I actually, sometimes the introduction is the part that people skip over. Please don't skip over this introduction. First of all, it explains the quirkiness of who I am, the foolishness of who I am, the brilliance that is in there. It gives a sense as to like the tone of who I am and what I'm trying to bring into this space. But the part around equity that is so frustrating to me that doesn't get emphasized on is that equity by definition only exists because of inequity.
Yes.
We would not talk about equity if we didn't have problems, right? So equity inherently spotlights the problem and asks the questions of how do we then get to a place of equity and how do we use equity? So equity is both an outcome and a process. So how do we actively how do we use it as our technology to get to this outcome that we all deserve? So equity for me is not just about the forward-looking, impact we want to have. It needs there to be like this wider accordion of like, but how did we get here? What was the starting point? And so that to me is kind of the broad definition. The first chapter, though, is 40 Thoughts on Equity, really focuses on like, but there are characteristics of equity too, right? Like there's a being, there's a flow, there's and it deserves to continue to be expounded on, because for me to know what equity means, like for Kelly, means that you would have to sit and listen to Kelly's journey. You would have to really understand like, what is it that Kelly has been missing? And then you'd almost have to, recognizing the intersections that are obvious to me as a Black woman in America, you also then have to think about the fact that there isn't just one Kelly. So equity as a movement then is really about how do I imagine that Kelly is not the only one experiencing these inequities, and then what do we need to design for more people that are in that space to experience more wholeness, right? And so that mindset is not about sitting here and needing to read every article, sitting here and needing to listen to everybody's lived experiences. It's sitting and recognizing I've heard enough from enough of the same type of people that are experiencing harm, that are experiencing lack of safety, that are experiencing, underemployment, that I have enough to figure out how to address that in whatever way that I can, right? Without as we've heard from another person that we've had an interview with, without necessarily like, raising your blood pressure all the time. I do think some people probably do need to like probably get on an equity treadmill and burn a couple calories. And then I think some of us need to rotate out and rest. But I do think that the whole point is that we have enough to do enough while we're here, right? Yeah.
I feel that sometimes people struggle to wrap their minds around what equity actually looks like. So can you provide some examples of equity in practice?
I'm glad that you said that. I think people do struggle with that, which is why in this book is also full of conversations. It's intended for people to visualize equity from practitioners who could have chose to do anything in the world, to be anything in the world. But majority of them in this book, similar to myself, similar to us, have come from spaces where statistically and experientially, they've experienced the ills of oppression, in many ways still are, but they have chosen to be a part of the problem solving. That is what they do, even if it's not in their title. And so when I was doing this book, I struggled with, is this going to be a book solely about how Ife does equity and what it looks like for me? I could, but I also know that one of my concerns and critiques is that I don't think a 1, 2, 3 step process is actually what is helpful in a world that looks at self-help, in a world where there's a market for just give me the toolbox, in a world where I do think there are some really well-intentioned people that really want to be impactful. And also we've been taught, like our education system teaches us, like systematizes us to do things like input, output. And this is not one of those books. Equity is gonna look different for Dominique Morgan, who is, the first, I believe, Black trans woman to lead a major fund at a philanthropic organization that focuses on trans futures, but also is formerly incarcerated. Her process is completely different, right? As far as what it looks like. It's gonna look different than one of my mentors, Ross Moskowitz, who is, of ancestry of both Russian and Jewish ancestry, and is a partner at a law firm, right? And is really grappling with this concept of allyship and what it means to be both white and also connected to a history of, oppression. Right. So one of the things that I am maybe doing that's going to be uncomfortable for people is that it's a book full of many answers, and it also forces you to craft a little bit for yourself how you practice equity versus how you create just solely the outcome on the other side.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey in writing this book. What did it cost you?
It cost me some clients. It takes a lot of time to write a book.
Yeah.
It cost me both time. There's a thing around time that for me with this was very much connected to rest, that was missing. But I do think, and I think this, it definitely impacted. I don't want to say it cost me, but it impacted my recovery from long COVID. I wrote this book in its entirety while having long COVID. In many ways, I still have some of the symptoms, but the height of the symptoms, like I have videos where just to capture the frequency of how many times my fingers, especially on my left side, seems to be the most impacted, how many times my hands would just tremor and would just watch it and just watch it flicker and just have to wait till it stopped. Or what it meant to have to stand up and type because your feet are doing weird things and spazzing. For many of the months I didn't write anything because the part that was the most impacted was memory. And that is, I know we have a broad audience, but when you think back to your mamas and your praying grandmothers and just the thought of to gain the whole world and lose your mind or lose your soul, it really just reminds you of the fickle and fragile nature of memory, things that you actually don't, ability as a whole, but really as a writer and somebody who's always written, somebody that at many times is consulted just to help with words and craft thoughts. When you can't craft it for something you've been doing for so long, it was very much a challenge. Yeah.
What did writing this book teach you?
First of all, it taught me that we need to honor disabled voices more. I mean, I already had a visual disability. It is not apparent to people when they see it, when they see me. But I think more and more, as we got to the conclusion of this book and really beating myself up, this is not all of this kind of coincides with the workshops that I've done. And, I forgot to put this in there. And, what about this? I think letting go, there's just something about the writing process, no matter what the topic is. I was just I have to let go of that and just recognize there is enough and I'm enough, right? No matter what space of being that I'm in. But broadly, as this book is about the equity mindset, and I have teachers in this book that are connected to a lifelong journey of being a part of the disability community. I'm wow, we're missing so many tools in our toolbox, man. There are people that every day they're creating solutions and we don't even know what those solutions are because people don't care to ask, right? They are literally not only waiting for the status quo to change, but they are also figuring out how to make it work in their cubicle, how to, advocate for themselves, how to sustain harm just so they can get a paycheck. I think there's a lot about a lot more curiosity that came to me as a result of like, what else needs to be included in the mindset. What I'm happy about it is that I get to be a participant in my own book versus like the expert in my own book. Like I get to engage with folks, and the conversations are a little bit like, you know, a tennis match between like individuals that are like trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I just want people to get comfortable with like trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So this book just launched yesterday, but you're already a successful author, in that you hit a couple of the top of a couple of bestseller lists, specifically at Amazon. So talk a little bit about that, because I want to acknowledge that, and I want you to share that.
New release, I mean, it's trending to be bestseller. We hope that that happens, but it was on like some top new release books. No, it's cool. Like I think I'm not really good at, you know, celebrating myself. I can get real Daria about that shit. But there is a baseline joy though with all of that, right? Like the areas, and you know, this is like many people that do like social science research don't even get acknowledged for their shit. So when it was coming up on like sociology lists, I was like, that's kind of cool, or social sciences. But the three steady spaces that it was coming up in was organizational change, workplace culture, and discrimination and racism. And when I think about just the honey that creates, I was like, that's actually those are the parts of this book that those are the communities that I want people to feel like, you know, pick this up. And as you know, I don't think the equity conversation should be just in the workplace. This book does focus, and it explains in the introduction why I'm focusing on labor, but the equity mindset should broadly be discussed as a social problem solving, you know, agenda, if you will. Like it is the human rights. What we've inherited is a real like chasm between communities, right? And so it is really about like, let's not look at the social ills as fragmented issues. Let's really take a step back and really ask, why is it that the same communities are experiencing the brunt of the negative parts of humanity, no matter where you go in the globe? Like, why is that? And then to really think about what that then means from the macro to the micro, as to like, in my space, in my position, in my field, in my industry, do I even know the history of inequity in my field and how we got there? And then what is our role to change that, right? Recognizing that poor, rich, or indifferent, most people have to work. Like it's the thing that you just can't really get around. And if you can get around it, you're either on the spectrum of being extremely privileged to get around it, or actually being like literally disenfranchised from working, right? Whether it's from ability, citizenship, whatever the case may be.
So there are a lot of either aspiring authors or first-time authors who have, you know, written books or have books in their hearts. What recommendation do you have, or advice do you have to people who are working on a book, or really want to work on a book and really want to write a book? Yeah,
this is the stuff you would not know. I was speaking to some of our team here about this. This is the stuff you wouldn't know until you're on the other side, or maybe you consult with people ahead of time. Speak to as many people that have written books about their writing process. There's writing the activity, and then there's writing the business. And so learning as much about the business ahead of time is helpful. Publishing world is a very white space. Even the best intentioned people do not get us. They do not understand us. They do not understand our tone, which is very important when you think about the editing process. You are your best advocate in that space. But there's also a lot of questions I didn't know to ask, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And sometimes you are treated as somebody that should know the business. So if you're thinking about writing, like learn up on the business. That's not something that I think I did the best job on. Connected to that, creating a little bit of a tribe around, like, already think about your book in these, like, with the binding and the front and the back. Okay, once it's here, like, what does amplification look like? Who are you telling about it? All of that really crept up on me. And so I just think that that's just like really practical. Those are some really practical things. I will say though, I went through a period where I grew up loving, I was a bookworm. I was like my first, I thought it was like my first big girl book was like Their Eyes Were Watching God. Didn't know what the heck was going on at that time. But like read Their Eyes Were Watching God, read Song of Solomon, was just like all in my like Toni Morrison and my, and all the greats. But then I got jaded and really like started thinking about like, do books even matter? Like, are people even reading books and what have you? And then it's almost kind of like came full circle with like books being banned right now and what it means to write at this moment, and not even write, any type of creative like production, that in many ways, as we were losing the Maya Angelou's or the transitioning of the Maya Angelou's and the Toni Morrisons, I really just felt like, and the Bell Hooks, it just felt like we still have them, but we have them through their works. And so I do think that we have to be very intentional about encouraging each other to leave some type of a footprint behind. And so there is something that feels very wild about there being something that will stay, be beyond me in some kind of a way. And I think that's important at a time where the erasure of history is a national and maybe even beyond national like priority for so many, especially as it relates to equity.
So as we wrap up, we are in a very peculiar moment here in the United States, especially as relates to this conversation of DEI, and many would say that diversity, equity, and inclusion are under assault and under attack. How do we need to respond collectively as a community of Black people, of allies, of people who aspire for a fair and just world? How should we show up in this moment?
Yeah, I love that. Because I think the we depends on how either close to the center or to the margin that you are in. I would say for those that are on the outer part of the margin, and I recommend people pick up bell hooks from the margin to the center, that you rest. Like, I do think that this is a period of sabbaticals, as our team calls them, radical sabbaticals, that this is a period of being much closer to community and not looking for outside sources to validate who we are, that we honor our movements, especially of recent day, and that we also start asking ourselves the questions around what intra-community equity means for us. I do think that there are times when D&I is raised, it feels like a space where people of color, unfortunately, but also understandably, are the teachers of communities that benefit the most from society. But that puts a lot of work on us. That's a lot of work. And then there's like this weird thing is like, and in a weird way, we also should be the ones leading this work, because I think part of the reason why a lot of efforts aren't sustainable is because there are holes in who the communicator is as to how they are able to bring a problem-solving mindset to experiences that many of them haven't experienced. So it becomes very like regimen and definitions and do 1, 2, 3 versus really like getting the essence of what it means to experience oppression. Yeah. So I think that there's like a rest component, but also figuring out what does equity mean? Like what is this way that I can channel my strengths to be a part of this problem solving puzzle without burning out, and also recognizing that like within our communities, we have intersectional issues as well. Yeah. We have gender issues, we have disability issues, we have colorism issues. So there is an equity mindset conversation that we need to be having in our spaces, and that's going to take a lot of work, and probably just as valiant of a movement could be focused just on that. I think for those that are closer to privilege, and we've done this work, you know, BIA is implementing the clapback for a reason, because we know that no industry is safe. Every industry is experiencing an equity crisis. We're seeing those who are creatives, who create the amazing content that we all at times take for granted when we see the finished product on Netflix or whatever. Those writers are right now striking, trying to figure out if they're actually going to be needed in the future. And many of them are Black and brown and trying to break their way through. So the concept of like moving up in their industry may not actually exist anymore. And that's a dream. That's not a dream deferred. That's a dream denied, right? So what does that mean for the executive that, you know, felt that fire on the streets, whether it was Trayvon Martin or Sean Bell or Breonna Taylor or George Floyd? Take that fire and then figure out what that means for communities that need power to be behind their voice. For those that are, and I guess I'll end with this, for those that are especially not Black, but also not white, I do think that there is a unique conversation about the connections that they have to. Let me rephrase that. How anti-Blackness impacts us all, but also how anti-Blackness, understanding anti-Blackness, is not just about Black people. Just like whiteness is not just about white people, that these laws that are in place are directly connected to their ability to also experience the fullness of humanity, that the othering of us is also by design, you know, created so that they can distance themselves from the community that in many ways we've all been programmed and socialized as determining that it's their fault that they're in that situation. So I think we're actually moving towards, because we're moving towards a more brown society. I get nervous when people say brown and they assume that, oh, it's becoming more brown, i.e. less white, therefore there's going to be less whiteness. But if we're not practicing anything that's combating the psychology of whiteness, then our mindset is actually not only going to be the same, we're actually going to be treating each other. And we're going to be the ones on both sides of oppression, right? And so I think that we have to create intentional spaces that like call that out as a way of bringing in, not as a way of like isolating ourselves.
I've heard it said that whiteness has a very strong immune system.
It's the finest wine. That's what I like to say.
It's very intoxicating.
It's a very, very fine wine. It evolves.
With just British, right? And then it was opened up to the Scottish and the Irish and then the, you know, all of Western Europe.
But it will never, ever be Black. It will never, ever trickle to us. And there's something both beautiful. I mean, I watch a lot of X-Men and I watch a lot of, like, there's something, because it's not as pure, it's not as whatever comical as like good and evil, but it is a spiritual fight, because we will never, I am too dark to be white. I don't care how many rapes happen that our ancestors did not ask for. I don't care how many degrees you bestow upon us. I don't care how fair your skin, how curly your hair, how light your eyes. You are never going to be white. And I think that that is something that, again, when I think about the browning of society, I think about the ways that whiteness creates passes for us to participate in privilege, but we're never, ever, ever going to experience, if whiteness is the standard of humanity, then we're never going to experience the fullness of that. If we challenge that there really shouldn't be a color, if you will, to humanity, then I think there's going to be some hard truths we'd all have to confront. But I also think that we have to be both. You have to be aware of what you're participating in to break it down. And so hopefully this is a wake up call of, I don't need to give you any more facts. We got enough facts. You don't need another article. I have a lot of degrees, but this is not a research book. This is not a legal book. This is actually like, can you sit with the conversation long enough to be like, I've got to do some shit differently, right? And that's the challenge, because it's not a typical business book. I think people just want to know what to do and then do good work. But me being a full human being is not good work. That is actually, like, I think the human commission. Like that's the reason why we're here.
Where can people find the book?
I don't want to advertise any particular company. If you Google my social justice background, I would probably get in trouble. But wherever books are sold, you can go there. But also support your Black and brown and independent bookstores. Even if they don't have it, they can order it for you. Go to your public libraries. I know that some of them are also starting to pick them up. But you can also go to ifeomasinachi.com. 13 letters, not that hard. Stop tripping, you guys. It's just IFEOMASINACHI.com. And get yourself a link to get the book. So easy.
So easy.
Damn near literal.
This is wonderful.
Oh, thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time, for joining me on this journey of From Chains to Links, from giving birth to our baby. This is an Ife, one of her many pearls that fall out of her mouth. Chains to Links is you definitely gave
a product of the equity mindset,
impetus to even this conversation. So thank you for all the ways you continue to pour into our work at Black Innovation Alliance and pour into the improvement of our society through thought projects like the equity mindset.
Thank you.
All right. Well, see you at the next episode.
I know.
All right. Thanks, Ife. Thank y'all so much for joining us for another episode of From Chains to Links, where I got the opportunity to interview my sister friend, Ifeoma Ike, on her brand new book, The Equity Mindset. Pick it up at ifeomasinachi.com and continue to follow her journey online and at Black Innovation Alliance. We appreciate y'all. Peace.
Hey, everybody. Hope you loved the episode as much as we did.
Join us at blackinnovationalliance.com to continue the conversation. And remember to subscribe, like,
and share the podcast as we continue to build the movement
for true Black prosperity.